he had met all the requirements. I was supposed to get my resident permit in 24 hours.
Right.
So in this 24 hours, I had no idea what was waiting for me after I landed in Schiphol. So I go to pick my residence permit, and the officer who was in charge decided to be difficult. She wanted to change my surname, which when I had no plan to come to Europe anyway, I'm a traditional woman. I had changed my surname from my father to my husband. But now she wanted to change it back to my father's name. And yet all my documents, my Kenyan passport, every document I had was in my husband's name as a surname.
Right.
It didn't matter how much I explained. I very soon realized she wasn't even interested in hearing what I have to say. She was bent on changing it. So I got very annoyed, and I really fought, and I kept my name, and I could come for my residence permit the following day. But that was a traumatic experience for me, very traumatic. Don't forget that I didn't want it ever to come, you know? So here I am, and the first day, I immediately made 3 conclusions. I am not valued here. I am not wanted here. I am hated because of the color of my skin. So from that day forward, I think that's when I went into this extreme distress culture shock. That's how it is called, the most extreme. And then, of course, I must have started my depression then, because I was very sad and very unhappy. But after that 7 months, I got this high-flying job and all that, but I was still very unhappy. Like I've told you, I was in depression. And then I went for help. So long story short, so I went for help and found out I had depression. How did I find out I had depression? In the process of my coaching, I found out that my problem of depression, my problem of the hatred and the anger I had nothing to do with the Dutch people, had nothing to do with racism, had nothing to do with this woman who gave me a traumatic experience when I first came. It had something very deep rooted in me about my upbringing, something that completely had nothing to do with my environment, but the way I was brought up. And so my pain came from the pain of my grandmother. My grandmother, I wasn't close to her. So that was very shocking because I wasn't close to my grandmother. My grandmother was very withdrawn. So how could I get this pain from my grandmother? But what happened is that I grew up with my father and my grandmother. We were living in the same compound with my parents and my grandmother. And my grandmother had been taken into concentration camp by colonialists, British colonialists. And so, first of all, when I was young, because we lived in a different area, people used to call me Mau Mau Kidogo, meaning little Mau Mau, when I was asking my parents, what is Mau Mau? And they would tell me, well, that is, for some of you who know the history of Kenya, the Mau Mau rebellion is what actually chased away the British so that we could liberate Kenya. So my tribe comes from the Mau Mau tribe. So I went home and I asked my dad, what is Mau Mau? And he told me, don't worry about it. It's your heritage. And he explained to me how they fought for freedom in Kenya. But he never told me anything anymore because he was a preacher. He didn't want to get into that very much. So I knew I wasn't getting any more information from that. So I realized I had to rely on my grandmother, who was very withdrawn and talked very little. Because every time, the only time I had my grandmother talking, she would be talking about the Mau Mau. But what shocked me is that though I found out that the pain of my grandmother was the reason for why I had such a big resentment for the Dutch people, is that my grandmother, I can't remember one full story she told me about the colonialists, used to call them Beberu. I can't remember one story.